Lovely to be here with you today. It's a great delight to call us to order and now to convene our third session of this Spiritual Ecologies Conference. It's an opportunity for us to reflect together on how the combined inter-included themes of education, theology, activism, contemplation might inform the many phases of contemporary environmental work. The day is also very much an honoring and offering in honor of the memory of Rabbi Ellen Bernstein, my friend and teacher, and that of so many countless others who passed away some 2 months ago, and our world is still reverberating with that loss. I've spoken a little bit about Ellen at the previous at the previous panels, and many wonderful tributes have been written, but in the context of our panel right now, I'd like to remind everyone that Ellen was a gifted author, a tireless advocate, and truly an inspiring educator who worked so tirelessly to infuse the work of ecology with a religious dimension. Though hardly a stranger to the environmental sciences, Ellen understood so well that the climate crisis is also a spiritual crisis, one that must be addressed by nurturing and inspiring human responsibility grounded in the appreciation of beauty, of interconnection, and intimacy. Ellen was also the longtime friend and collaborator with the Institute of Jewish Spirituality and Society, who have sponsored today's events and where I have the honor of serving as a senior scholar in residence. Here at the IJSS, our mission is to advance scholarship and social transformation, bringing Jewish spiritual knowledge to bear on the toughest challenges of contemporary society. We break down the barriers between spheres of knowledge and practice, enabling long-term collaboration among scholars, social researchers, and human service practitioners. Our third and final panel today will be devoted to a conversation exploring the relationship between scholarship, spiritual education, and activism. Looking at study and application as essentially intertwined, our panelists will share of their own experiences as teachers and practitioners within the classroom and within the field. So it's my great honor to introduce the first of our three speakers, Professor Chris Chapple, who is the Doshi Professor of Indic and Comparative Theology and the founding director of the Master of Arts in Yoga Studies at LMU in Los Angeles. A specialist in the religions of India, he has published more than 20 books, all of them amazing, many of which live on my bookshelf, including the recent Living Landscapes, Meditations on the Elements of in Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain yogas. He serves as the advisor to many different organizations and teaches online through the Center of Religion and Spirituality and Yoga Glow. Without any further ado, Professor Chapple, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and really an honor to remember Ellen. And I'm going to read a couple of sentences from this book that she edited. And these sentences introduce her own final chapter, How Community Forms Jew. You don't have to live far off in wilderness to experience nature on a regular basis. Nature is alive in the city if we take the time to notice. The most important thing is to love wherever we are. That's the beginning of stewardship. Now, I love this combination of topics, education and activism. And what I'll be sharing in this few minutes that we have together is a little bit of both. And I invite you to gaze upon this image. And this was in some ways the beginning of my own activism. And I'll just share a little bit of the story. We're gazing out from the Tongva Memorial. The Tongva are the first peoples of this region, which is now called Los Angeles County. They settled here about 1,000 years ago. They're a Shoshone-speaking people who muscled out or relocated to the north, Chumash peoples. And all of these people of this area lived in a delicate reciprocity between ocean and oak. And the food staples were taken from the ocean. And the oak tree provided the acorns when ground and processed, gave sustenance year-round, a land truly of plenty. When I arrived to this bluff in 1985, I was tasked with bringing the world's religions to the theology curriculum. And by simply accepting the job, I became the campus expert in Judaism, Islam, Shintoism, Taoism, Hinduism. The list is long. And as I made up this curriculum, I said, well, I want to do a full semester on Native American spirituality. And I had trained in that discipline with Thomas Berry at Fordham University just before he wrote the wonderful essay, The New Story, and launched his work in the direction of what we now call religion and ecology. But I was told by my then department chair, oh, those people don't have a religion. You cannot include that in our curriculum. They don't really have a theology. And I just, okay. And I waited and I became department chair, and I instituted the course with funding and brought onto campus an elder of the Ojibwe peoples. And he went to our president and said, we have no token in the entire county. We have no presence, no acknowledgement of the Tongva people. Let us dedicate this site. And with members of the Tongva community, in collaboration with our librarian and various experts, the landscape design people, this came to be a site for ceremony, a site for remembrance, a site to which I bring my students. A site that helped encourage, as we look down upon the view, we see some open land. And that open land comes through great advocacy on the part of Tongva and 48 nonprofit agencies, including the Sierra Club, for it not to become a golf course, for it not to become a 16-story skyscraper place, but to become a place of restoration, a place of rehabilitation. So I've been teaching for many decades religion and ecology here at Loyola Marymount University. And at the core, what I invite people to do is to enter into moments of formation. Maybe a little bit of transformation, but at beginning and end, striving to have people acknowledge who they are. And in one of my graduate seminars, as part of their first project, instead of writing an essay, having heard the wisdom of the Purusha Sukta from the Rig Veda, having heard the narrative of the horse sacrifice, this wonderful artist, Gabriela Canizales Ayala, created this image that, as you gaze upon it, you will see. We have so much going on, flowers at the feet, mountains at the midriff, flowing tresses of hair, heaven and earth, Mother Earth. And a remembrance from journeys in India to the Earth Temple in Kanchipuram. And an image, not of Mother Earth, but of Father Earth. And this image is from the Jain Temple here in Southern California in Buena Park, of Bhumia Deva. And I love how trendy he is, like so many of our undergraduates, sporting a mustache. But the earth as male. And the earth evoked and remembered through this Mula mantra, Lam. And I have the students as part of their education to enter the sonic world of mantra, to enter the repetition of this simple syllable in honor of Earth the God, Earth the Goddess. And then we'll spend another week on water. This particular temple, also in Tamil Nadu, is on the site of the world's oldest continuously maintained dam. And the little valley in which this temple resides is just so resplendent with greenery. And again, we lift up and celebrate. And as you saw in the earlier slide, we're close to the Pacific Ocean here. And we let this word Wam echo throughout our bodies. And then we move forward and upward to fire. This particular site, very famous as the residence of Ramana Maharshi, the great Advaita teacher of the 20th century. And John Seed took it upon himself, the great Australian eco-activist, to help restore greenery to Mount Arunachala. And we chant this syllable, Ram, 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 evoking and invoking heat. Air, the element air, so important both in terms of the external God, Vayu, and the internal force of prana, evoked with the syllable yam. And I love this because it shows how the heart is literally front and center with the process of life. And I'm reflecting on this morning's lectures on choose life, choose beauty, and then finally, space. Chidambaram temple, the Nataraj temple, so brilliantly painted, and so much enclosed with this space. And there's an invitation to the students to free their bodies within space, building from below to above, and then infusing from above to below. Where do these things land? And I have a beautiful story that I would like to share a little bit about something that happened with one of my students after the fact. And bear with me for 1 minute as I bring up his website. And the student, Connor Devane, as you can see, hiked the Continental Divide Trail when he graduated. And he did this remarkable project that included, during this gap year that he took, documentation of a 3,000-mile adventure. And he started in Canada, walked to Mexico, not only filming himself the entire way, but meeting with all different environmental groups through pre-arrangement, and creating not only this website, but this remarkable testament to what can happen if you live and think outside of the box. And I invite you to consider visiting that website so that you can get a little bit of the movie. And just recently we did an event here at LMU, and I had a student called Connor, and I wrote to who I thought was my student Connor, but my elder Connor showed up, and he sent me this email. He said, "I think you've got the wrong Connor, though it is nice to hear from you. I'm working on a just transition for Indigenous and immigrant farm workers out of the wine industry into climate resilience work and care for the land, prescribed fire, ecologically sound forestry, watershed regeneration, habitat restoration, etc. Through the grassroots labor coalition I work with, North Bay Jobs for Justice, and the New Orleans-based nonprofit Resilience Force. Lots of exciting stuff in the works. I wrote 2 successful grant proposals this fall to CAL FIRE and the Labor and Workforce Development Agency for just shy of 1.9 million to support the training and employment of workers at family sustaining wages of at least $35 an hour." So I'm just, really proud of Connor, and I wouldn't have known of what he was doing if I'd not sent that mistaken email. But I do want to make very explicit the link between education and activism. And then the last piece that I want to spend just a couple of minutes on is back to the narrative of place. And as we gaze from our Westchester Bluff down to Marina del Rey, what I do in my classes is tell the students a little bit of a sad story. And we heard earlier today about Manzanar and the deportation of Japanese Americans and the settlement of this particular quite lovely neighborhood. I do live here. Included what are called CC&Rs in the 1940s. And I show these to the students, community covenant restrictions. There's a long list of who is allowed to live in this neighborhood called Westchester, 30,000 people, and who is not allowed to live in Westchester, and where people are allowed to live. Blacks, Mexicans, Hindus, Japanese, the list is long. People not allowed to live here. But even the people that are allowed or were allowed in the 1940s to live here found restrictions. And in the western part, toward the ocean, no Jews. Jews were restricted to live only in the eastern part of this zip code 90045, 40,000 people, called Westchester. And the beneficence of the folks that developed this, Hannon and Burns, they were graduates of our university, and they gave land to a lot of churches, and they gave land for the building of 2 synagogues east of Sepulveda Boulevard. One of the synagogues was a Reform synagogue, and the other was a conservative synagogue. Both have since been turned into housing. And this particular site, I'm happy to say, has been turned into 90045's first affordable housing, which means that the people, the 100 families that apply to live here, will pay no more than 25% of their income, which if they are retired or on SSI, would mean that they could qualify for a rent of less than $500 if that's their ratio vis-a-vis income, for a unit that otherwise would cost a minimum of $2,000 to $4,000. So I just wanted to lift up the students who this was approved during Zoom teaching during the pandemic, and they were on those community neighborhood Zooms where they sort of stood their ground and spoke up on behalf of this project taking place, while the immediate neighbors would say in really not veiled language, "We don't want those people living here." So my takeaway is develop a sense of place. Let us form one another as best we can. And from that, automatically will flow activism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was a beautiful invocation and a beautiful journey along the pathways that you have walked and that your lucky students walk as well. Thank you so much. We now we have the opportunity to hear from Naama Sadan, a teacher and a learner. Her interest in holistic systems takes her between different worlds: environmental education, inner work, Jewish learning, and embodied practice. She's a PhD student at the Hebrew University, the Advanced School of the Environment, and one of the lead teachers at Einayich Yonim Fellowship for Spiritual Climate Leadership. She lives with her family in Berkeley, California. Naama, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ariel, and hello. Really glad to be here. Okay, so I wanted to share a little bit about a specific project that I'm really involved in. It's a project called Einayich Yonim, and I'm going to say a little more about it in just a moment. I'm going to share specifically about this project today within this broad world of spiritual ecologies, because this is where I met Ellen Bernstein. She was a mentor for one of our fellows. And I then met her later in a different place. So let's just get slides on and tell the story. All right. So the question that I want to explore today with you in the next 10-15 minutes is, can spiritual traditions advance youth environmental leadership? There's a lot of work with youth and helping youth advance environmental action. And youth are very loud in this important work that is being done around the world. I think Greta Thunberg is maybe the most famous ones, but she's definitely not the only one. There's a lot of teens that are doing a lot of work for environmental change. And most of the work is usually done through learning about science. So taking science, making it available for students, making it accessible for students, and then working with students about how to communicate that science to other people so that we can get more people on board understanding what's the right thing to do. And as you know, all of us have been teens at some point. Maybe we also know teens currently. Teens can be very excited and emotional about this kind of stuff, and they can totally go for it. And they're like, how is it possible that people don't see the truth? it's very annoying to them. They don't understand how is it possible. And you see Greta Thunberg speaking, and she's like, how can you do these things when you know these facts? I think as an adult, you're getting a little bit of a different perspective, and you understand that truth is not the thing that leads the world, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever your perspective is on it. But the question really is, what's the place, or what's the connection between spiritual traditions and youth that are doing this kind of like environmental leadership? What do they need except for this really important knowledge about the science of what's happening? So before we're going to dive into it, I just want to say two things about Ellen, who I met in these two places, in the Sabbath Project and in Eichen Fellowship. And I'm starting from the end, from the Sabbath Project. So a few months ago, maybe a year now, I was invited to speak in the Sabbath Project. It's a project that takes the idea of the biblical Sabbath, Shabbat, and asks about this, how can Shabbat inform environmental work? And I was talking there about Yemima Avital. She was a Jewish healer and medium, you might say, in the 80s in Israel, very famous. Lots and lots, tens of thousands of Israelis are practicing her work, and she was basically giving these spiritual teachings. And I had the special luck to start learning her teachings about 12 or 13 years ago, and about 6 years ago I started translating it. And why was that connected to the Sabbath Project? So Yemima has a very feminine way of looking at spirituality, and many of the things that she asks are coming from a life experience maybe of women. And she's asking, is waiting an action? Is waiting an action, or is waiting doing nothing? And she teaches how important it is to know how to wait in the right way, and how waiting can be a very active thing. This is one teaching that she has, but she also speaks similarly about receiving and about many things that are being thought about in the world as a passive thing, as if nothing is happening. Nothing happens when you wait. Nothing happens when you receive. But she teaches, no, actually a lot is happening when you wait, and a lot can happen when you receive. And there's a lot of work that can be done in very small moments of coming in very small places that are not being taught to us as active places. Ellen was there, and we were discussing some of these teachings, and she was very touched, and she asked me where she can learn more about that. At the moment, I was not teaching, and I gave her the name of my friend, and I think maybe a month before she died, we checked in, and she said, yeah, I'm learning with her, and I really love that learning. And I was like really excited about it, and I was like, I made a mental check to like talk to her about it next time I see her. And I'm sad that I never got to do that. But I think that it's not a coincidence that she was connected to it. And I think it's connected also to the way she worked. People are much more, I think, aware of the work of Ayanna Johnson in All We Can Save, but she's part of like a big movement of women. Ellen Kimmer, I think, is talking about that as well, who are speaking about environmental leadership that comes from a feminine place. It's a little bit of a different thing. It's environmental leadership that is centered in care, that is centered in community, that is centered in small actions, that allows for grief to be present, and that is not so anchored in science, and that is willing to accept that things are partial. And that's a different way of thinking about environmental leadership. So now I'm going to the beginning, the first place that I met Ellen, and that is in Eichen Fellowship. And an Eichen Fellowship is a fellowship for Jewish teens who are interested in doing climate leadership and are interested in doing this from a place that is grounded in Jewish tradition or in their ancestral tradition. And it's a project that is a grief project. It was started by a bereaved mother which her son was very involved in environmental work and in spiritual work. And Ellen was working with us there, and she was very influential for our work. An interesting thing to maybe know is that in the last decades, there's a growing awareness of environmental degradation and crisis for teens. They learn about it in schools, they learn about it from the news, and they know a lot more. But at the same time, with that increase, there's an increase also in climate anxiety. It goes together. It's not like the fact that people know the truth or the science and maybe even know about solutions makes them just like, okay, this is what we need to do, this is what we're going to do. It's actually, there's like a lot of work with that is cerebral work, and it causes people a lot of anxiety. And the work that I was trying to do in the South Project, the work that we're doing in Naama is really a work that asks, and I'm going back to the question, can spiritual traditions inform environmental leadership in youth? How can we bring the heart and the soul into this work so that we feel grounded, so that we feel that there are things that can help us calm and center and hold the purpose as we're working with the science. So what I'm going to do in the rest of the time I have is just say a few words about Enaichanim, and afterwards in the conversation, I'm happy to add a little more. So as I mentioned already, climate and inner world, young people in climate are, today we know that there's a lot of anxiety there, there's fear, there's feeling of loss of agency and loss of certainty. You can see that sign over here, you'll die of old age, we'll die of climate change. So that's kind of like a spirit that sometimes you can see in youth they're working for climate change. There is not so much space for grief. Grief is often suppressed, and there's really a need to navigate this energy. What do we do with all these accumulating energy? As I'm a teen and I know all these things, and I feel the anxiety and fear and loss of agency and certainty, and I don't have where to express my grief. So the thing that we're trying to think about when we're asking this question about spiritual traditions and climate leadership is really how can we move between the space of solutions and science and knowing what's right and the sense of just being with without trying to solve anything, but like to wait, to learn how to wait, to learn how to receive, to learn how to be in the partial place before we're moving into action, and to accept that this is a mode of action as well. Now, these are nice ideas, but what's happening? And we're speaking here about education, but also about activism and really the practice of it. So in 2020, after Yonim died, his mother gathered a group of people. We sat together and we were, for several months, we're thinking about ideas and strategies, and eventually we arrived at a fellowship model. We recruited students and we implemented a full cycle of students coming together. We had 14 fellows from 7 different states in the US, and we were getting together once a month to learn Jewish tradition that is associated with environmental leadership. So it would be things learning about what is responsibility, what is creation, what is redemption, how can we reinterpret it for a contemporary world. And after 7 months of learning, we got together for a retreat. And in that retreat, every student, based on all these things that we learned systems, tools, we learned Jewish texts, and we were really focusing also on connecting to creativity. Every one of them built a project that they then implemented in their own Jewish community, either a school or a shul. You can see here the arc of the curriculum. So we learned, we had 3 units, as I said, creation, revelation, redemption, and there was an action phase. I'm happy to share these slides with everyone who's interested afterwards. And what we were trying to achieve in doing this learning and in building this project is really to give a sense of agency so that teens don't feel that they lack agency, but that they can do things, even though it's maybe a very small thing. But like, we're trying to give them tools to plan a project. We're trying to build a community for them so that they're not feeling like that they're doing it alone, but that they are gathered together with other people who care about these things. And we were really hoping to give them roots so that when they're working, they're not working from their own personal individual place that is beautiful, but is like very small, but they're working from a place that is rooted in a tradition that is much bigger than them. So there's like two layers of rootedness or layers of connections here. One is the connection with the community that is aligned with me, and the other one is the connection with the bigger tradition that I'm coming from when I'm doing this work. And in that, I think community is a very common thing in spiritual places. It's almost a community of faith, you would say. And um, another thing that spiritual traditions are giving here to people who are trying to do environmental leadership is not only the community, but also the roots that I feel that I'm doing something not just because I believe it, but like I'm doing something because there's like generations that have thought about it and that have taught me how to channel my energy to the right place. So I can talk more and more about what does it mean to have agency by connection, but I think that, and you can see here just a few examples of projects fellows did habitat restoration, composting systems, repurposing wood, cleaning teams, and the community, the way we built the community was through the peers, but also mentors. Ellen was one of these mentors, but these were mentors in their local community. And again, the roots, we were doing a lot of learning, a lot of interpreting, and a lot of connection to self. So I'm just gonna close here, going back to the question, what can traditional spiritual traditions contribute to youth advancing environmental change? They have, I think, pretty important things to contribute. They can bring a new perspective of what action can look like. They can give individuals the sense of community. They can give individuals the sense of connection to something that is bigger than them. And that sense of purpose is really essential when we're working with our hearts and not just with our minds. So may these things be to elevate the soul of Ellen, and thank you very much for everything.
Thank you so much, Naama. What a beautiful exploration of the programs that you've been so deeply involved in. So many questions and so many points of conversation, but we'll save those for just a few minutes from now when we shift into the Q&A. It's my great pleasure to introduce our third and final speaker panelist for this part of the afternoon in this our final session, and that is Dr. Shamu Sadeh, who is the co-founder of the Adamah Farm and Fellowship, who has been taking people into the woods and onto the farm for 35 years. It was a conversation with Ellen Bernstein in 1994, to whom Shamu sent 2 essays for her anthology, Ecology and the Jewish Spirit, that first connected him to the Teva Learning Center and Isabella Friedman, where he still lives and works. He loves leading morning prayers around the fire and schlepping goat fencing, mulch, or compost. Sounds pretty ideal. Shamu, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being with us today. You're still on mute.
All right. Thanks for having me. And thank you to Christopher and Naama. Still thinking about the agency community roots that you outlined could fit very well for the work that I have been doing here. And again, just so grateful for Ellen, who my father knew her originally and sent me Let the Earth Teach You Torah in 93 or 94, which must have been pretty soon after it came out. At the time was a totally dedicated on the path environmental educator in a secular realm, the secular realm, not in a Jewish way, not feeling so connected to my Judaism. Together with that book, Garden of Choice Fruit, Ellen was involved with, and the draft of a book my father wrote on family history, like that was my path back into Judaism as a young adult, about the age of many of the folks I work with now. So yeah, may her memory be a blessing. Yeah, I got to come here in 1994 in the early days of the Teva Learning Center and be part of the creation of this whole Jewish environmental field in a lot of ways that I guess it's, wherever you are, you think that's the navel of the world, right? So for me here, it's Ir HaKodesh, the holy city of Falls Village, and the Isabella Friedman Jewish Retreat Center. So much, and Ellen served on our advisory board for at least a decade, teaching and helping fundraise and helping me to become a professional and figure out how to do this work. So yeah, we say that we're cultivating we say that we're cultivating the soul and the soil. The word Adamah in Hebrew, of course, is from our creation story, from one of our two creation stories, that the Adam, that human, was created from the dust of the Adamah. And in Hebrew, you hear that connection, you can feel it if you have a relationship with that, with the ancient language. The word Adam, the word Adamah, the word for soil and earth and blood and red, it's all there. And so one of the first classes I do with the folks I work with here and when I teach other places is ask, how could we translate the word for human? The word in English, how would we translate ha-adam, the Adam, the human, how do we translate that in English? Because in some way that quandary is a distillation of the challenge that we have and the challenge that I think Ellen Bernstein worked most of her life on, how we put ourselves in relationship with the earth. What is our purpose? How do we be in right relationship? What is our role here on the earth? So I have spent the last many years figuring that out, mostly by experiential education, taking people outside, and in the last 20 years, really by spending time cultivating the land and farming with folks. And so I'd love to show you some pictures of that and give you a sense of what that's like. I'm fundamentally an experiential educator. I'm not an academic. I start with the experience. What experience can we have together? What shared experience can we build from? Something that we feel in our chest, that we breathe in, something that we get under our fingernails. And then we can take a step back and talk about it and theorize, but we start with that experience. So I'll give you a little tour of the farm and our work here at the Adamah Fellowship. We are part of a larger organization that is now called, wait for it, Adamah, People, Planet, Purpose, and we do all kinds of programs. We are part of a national organization that includes 2 retreat centers, Pearlstone and Isabella Friedman, and hubs everywhere from San Diego to Detroit to New York City and growing places. And we think of ourselves as the kind of the home address for the Jewish environmental movement, climate leadership, education programs, transformative experiences, all of the above. this is some of what we do and the places that we do it. Yeah, and so I invite you to look us up, to engage with us in whatever way you can, and wherever you are. Yeah, so here we are on our 15-acre certified organic, really regenerative farm in Falls Village. We say that we cultivate the soul and soil, and we harvest vegetables and people. By that meaning we grow people through using farming. How can we understand our relationship to the tradition better? How does our relationship to Shabbat change when we've worked together all week, those 6 days? And how does it make the experience of saying a blessing over food that you've grown, how is that different? How does that inform, or, talk about Shabbat or Shemitah or blessings or any of kashrut? We raise animals and do a educational slaughter here and process the animals ourselves and make cloth out of goat skin. How can we get back into the tactile experience of cultivation and community living together, and how does that shift our experience of Jewish life and ritual and eating and our understanding of farm policy and all that? Yes, we spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of time. I'm just laughing at myself because I talk about compost a lot. Yeah, I just think it's a beautiful thing to be able to do. Jana is our farm director. She is an expert at growing great vegetables. I make sure to supply her and the farm with really good compost to do that with. And I work with the animals and I work on perennial food projects, but we do believe transformation is in progress in our compost yard. And these chickens are the helpers in that process. Starting things out in the greenhouse here. We have a lot of hands on our vegetables and a lot of hands in the soil. These are the Adamah fellows, the Adamanics. We run a residential program for 3 months in the summer, 3 months in the fall. If you're 20 or 39, feel free to come and join us. We also make sauerkraut. We also make shtick. I wonder if I can actually play. No, I don't think that'll work. Anyway, we're big on shtick production. We make silly videos to entertain ourselves and others. We make pickles and sauerkraut. And yes, of course, we milk goats. We understand that goats and shepherding and sheep were an important part of our past as a people. That was a big part of what we do. And you can look at temple ritual, you can look at the Hebrew language, you can look at our notions of leadership to understand how embedded all that shepherding is. It's not just a metaphor, the shepherd and his flock. It's an expression of a lived experience, Psalm 23 and all. So this is some of our time here with the goats, and that's a goat skin and cutting cloth for mezuzot out of the goat skin, caring for the animals. And we spend each morning, Monday through Friday, around a fire, praying, chanting, meditating. Our day starts with prayer. We aim ourselves towards gratitude. And we do classes on everything from the book of Job and ecological ethics to how Judaism deals with animals, to the parallels between the Jewish holiday cycle and, of course, the agricultural and natural cycles, and farm policy and climate and composting. Did I mention composting already? Jewish creation stories. And we are, thank God, here located in the Jewish Retreat Center, so we get to participate and create Jewish ritual. This is our Shavuot parade It'll be happening in Isabella Friedman in just a couple weeks here. We do a first fruits parade, often complete with goats or sometimes chickens and bundles of rye. And this is not a historic recreation of temple times. This is an adaptation, an evolution. What do we want to do with that tradition? How does that make sense here in the diaspora, in a different place and different time? These rituals, land-based rituals of gratitude, giving, sharing, and commitment to place. How do we bring that alive today? Yeah, you can still join us. There's still spots left in our Shavuot retreat. You can look it up on our website. And I just wanted to include a few slides here because I realize when I go places and talk about what we do, I don't have photographs of Shabbat. I don't have slides showing Jewish ritual because we're not running around with our phones at that time as we are. We've got a zillion photos of farming and very few. So I just put these here as a placeholder of all those things we don't usually take pictures of. Shabbat, the silence, the rest, the mikvah we do in the lake beforehand. We represent Shabbat and Shemitah on the farm by areas that we call our sevens. Those are parts of the farm that are dedicated to, not to human consumption, but to native plants, feeding the pollinators. And that's the way that we release. We take our hands off these parts of the farm. And for us, the scale of the farm we are, and for various reasons, that's the way we do it, rather than moving that around every year, or rather than stopping to farm every 7 years. So I hope that gives you a little sense of of what we do here, and really happy to join with the other speakers and answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shamu. That was such a wonderful tour. I have a feeling you're going to have us all over pretty soon for dinner. It sounds so exciting, and maybe making some compost together with you. I see that we have a question from Johnny, who's joining us today. I also have a question, and perhaps I can ask this as we get our conversation started. Um, what are some of the greatest challenges that you face in this kind of educational work, in the classroom, in the field, in the classroom and the field, however that might be?
Is this for me? Naama?
It's for everyone.
Everyone, sorry.
I suspect your challenges are non-isometric in that the challenges at LMU are not the challenges of
the
Adamah.
other
The
folks speak
challenges of Einai Yonim as a self-selecting group are also different.
Yeah, I think the challenge is having the students relax. And I don't have to tell them, I just say, okay, now we're walking over here. And on the one hand, it's made clear that the experience of both the movement and awareness and being really just awake to the location is part of the educational process. And sometimes that's a little bit confusing to them, but then they really, really appreciate it generally. So I've never had someone complain about going for a walk.
I'm not sure exactly what kind of challenges you're asking about. But I'll just say that the self-selecting, so an Eichonim is a fellowship and has limited spots, but I think that still it feels like one challenge is to find the people who want to do this work. I feel like there's a lot of buzz around, but also at the same time, people are busy with a lot of things, and I think environmental work is is just one of many things. It feels sometimes when you're in the realms or in the circles of people who are talking about environmental, like this is the central thing in the world, but I find it to be marginalized many times. And I think one challenge is really to kind of like get the people in, to get them to come and to want to participate, to want to dedicate a lot of time and effort to do this work. And I think that when you add the spiritual layer, even more so, because at least with the way I learned from Mimima and Kfiya Ruhani, there's no forcing in the spiritual. So there's nothing that you can do or that you want to do that is like kind of like forceful. There's a lot of an invitation to come in, and I think um it's a real challenge of life. But like really how do you um kind of like find the power to take an obligation on when the obligation is not external to you and to join that kind of work. If that answers your question, I'm happy. If not, happy to talk about other challenges.
Yeah, I think, yeah, some of what Naama said really makes sense for us too, in terms of the challenges of this work. I mean, I'd say pluralism, we work with a pretty wide range of Jews and also some folks who aren't Jewish. So getting people together for creating a prayer experience or Shabbat experience where everyone is comfortable enough and challenged enough and feels enough sense of belonging can be challenging. It is also, like Christopher mentioned, is a challenge, especially the first couple of weeks. The Adamanics we have here now just got here 10 days ago to get them to relax, to think into the work we're doing and being outside, and there's bugs and it's hot and it's dirty and it rained a lot this morning, and here we are in discomfort together. Thank you.
Another question that really emerged for me, and again, this is for all three of you, as you were speaking, is that I find the work that each one of you does in very different ways to be tremendously inspiring. And as someone who's also involved in the field of education myself, I'm wondering if you might be willing to share, where do you go or what do you do to restore your own inner wells as educators? Because there's a lot of receiving that we get from our students and a lot of wonderful things that we receive as educators. It's also very hard work, and there's a lot of giving that's involved in that work also.
I can start. I would say that I have, first of all, every winter, in terms of my seasonal flow, I write myself a list of things that I want to try to explore, try to learn, whether that's Jewishly or otherwise, but it always includes some Jewish and ecological learning. Whether that's like agroforestry and chestnuts and brushing up my biblical Hebrew, for example. I also play music and I run and swim a lot, and that helps me.
I think one thing that saves me my whole life is keeping Shabbat. It just really keeps me sane. I love candle lighting, where whatever happens this week and that is like however stressed it is or however full or however not full it is, it's just like I light the candles and that's it. There's nothing to do. I feel that this kind of discipline that for me at least was just part of how I grew up is so supportive. Because I know that there's going to be a day when I'm not able to think about any kind of like professional stressors that I have in my life. So that's something I'm very grateful for. And then in the teaching itself, it really depends. But I feel that for me, because the teaching that I do in spiritual ecology is like very limited, it's not the bulk of what I do. For me, it's actually a place that is pretty charging. I mean, often I finish these type of classes and I'm like, wow, I just channeled something that feels so right, and it just kind of like gives me energy for the rest of my day. That's Yeah. So I think of these specific classes as something that actually is very nourishing, and helps me with other things that are less so.
Yeah, I just had some acupuncture, and the questionnaire was like, do you ever get down in the dumps? Do you ever have this problem? Do you ever have that problem? Do you lose your motivation? And I felt sort of embarrassed, but no, this isn't a problem. And then, so the question is, what do we do to sustain? And in my own case, I started a yoga practice as a teenager, and I've kept it for over 50 years. And I've also, when Naama mentioned Sabbath, I have sort of a double Sabbath. So I have two double things to talk about. So going again back more than 50 years, and I'm not as devoted to my Saturday practice as I am to my Sunday practice, but my Saturday Sabbath equivalent is that I try not to say anything before noon. Okay, so keeping silent. And back in the day, when I was in my 20s, I was silent every Saturday, like 100% silent. And there's just this energy, and particularly when you start speaking again, this incredible appreciation of the power of voice. Then my Sunday Sabbath practice is fasting. And again, I've been doing this for more than 50 years. Juice, water, herb tea, and through the day. And that I find is really quite restorative in terms of energy. And then like Shamu, I bicycle, that's my major mode of transport. And I swim. We have this year-round outdoor pool that is just so amazing. And I try to get in there 3 or 4 times a week. And then again, with the regular daily meditation and yoga, I don't find that I get too much discouragement. But of course, there are people that stand in the way sometimes of what you want to do, and you just have to be patient. So I see Michael has a question here. We are talking about education and spiritual ecology here. What is the one thing that we feel is the most important one thing that education in this new and emerging field should impart to those who wish to be educated? And that's such a fantastic question. And I think, again, I know I'm quoting E.M. Forster or somebody, but only connect, and by that I mean, as a teacher, connecting emotionally and intellectually with the students, but more significantly, creating pathways for the students to have the tools to connect themselves. Now, I had a cluster of Kuwaitis this semester. And those of us who know about Kuwait, we know that they have the best of everything that they could ever want, including education. And they have access to people that help them, I'm assuming, if they need to be helped. But one of the things that I said, okay, your paper is technically perfect, your reflection is okay, but where are you? And my big drive in terms of, what is education? Finding one's own voice. So I just kept on telling them, you're from Kuwait. What you've written has nothing to do with Kuwait. This course is about ecology and oil and things that have everything to do with Kuwait. Please become self-reflective and please express yourself. Don't just give me a bundle of facts that you've looked up somewhere. So connect, and connect with your own place is my one thing that I would hope for.
To Michael? Yeah. I mean, I would just say that the thing that we should impart to those who wish to be educated, really, the first thing that came to my mind is like, Shamu, I think you mentioned it, is to learn how to be like in discomfort. I think that's a super important thing that the Western education that we get is all the time teaching us how to not do, and how to kind of like avoid, which has its own good things probably, but like I think spiritual traditions, like part of it is just to learn to be in discomfort. And I think environmental life that is like more connected to nature, yeah, there's some things that are hot and sometimes there's bugs and sometimes you have to walk a little more than you want. You have to divide your trash and all these things. It's not so comfortable. And I think you can't expect people to just do things that are not convenient for them, um, especially when the systems don't support it, if they don't have any kind of like inner resiliency to choose it. I think that spiritual work can definitely help with that, to orient people, to connect people, to kind of like align where we want to be. And the other thing that I'm thinking as I'm talking is that the beautiful thing about spiritual traditions and spiritual work is like it's endless. And I think that's one of my surprises, as I'm getting older, that I thought that when I'll be 30, everything will be done. I'll know what I'm doing, where I am, what I'm, what's going on. I'll just repeat. But as I'm almost 40 now, I'm like, wow, it's actually all the time opens up and opens up. And especially when you have spiritual practice, it all the time opens up. There's more. And this connection of environmental and spiritual means that you're not just trying to avoid a catastrophe, but there's a purpose in life. You're trying to get to harmony. I think it feels very different when you're running away from catastrophe or when you're kind of trying to reach harmony and a different way of communicating between people and between people and life. And it's my impression that spiritual traditions are trying to find the recipe for this for a long time. So I feel that there's a lot to gain when you're engaged in both things.
When you enter our farm that says, what are you grateful for? So we put gratitude and awe at the center. And I also love Martin Buber, who would say, you don't answer a question, you answer a person. So it's hard to say, there's no singular educational focus. There is this student, and then there's this student, there's this learner.
Shamu, that question of, or that point about relationality, I think brings us to a question that Ellie has asked in the Q&A, which is how do you bring young people who aren't already integrated into this work of ecology, sustainability, whether from a religious perspective or otherwise, either because they have, come to the place of anxiety that there's nothing to be done, I don't know what to do, or perhaps I can't do it, it's too big for me, or that's just irrelevant to me. There are so many reasons that for young people it's so hard to enter into um, the great work, shall we say, um, as Barry would put it. Um, how do you bring them in? Speaking of young people, we just had one join our audience, join us. He's ready. He's ready.
Love how the wide eyes, amazing, beautiful. And I'm also thinking of this morning where our speaker lifted up her two beautiful sons and said, I'm not sure that they were good, but they sure were beautiful when they were babies. So how to get people to, quote, buy in? And what I try not to do is to overwhelm them with the data that points to the apocalypse. There's so much of it. And what I do like to do is to talk about things that will likely impact them, which is the amount of insurance that they will need to pay. And I've had students from Florida, and yeah, they're having a problem. And I know many people who have lost their homes here to fire in Southern California, which is not necessarily a climate change thing, but may become more so. And, there's just this reality check that sort of brings them sideways to the table. And by getting them outdoors, there is just this, again, the word gratitude came up, just this gratitude of entering the space of noticing. And I recall one time we have this canyon up in Beverly Hills where we go a few times a semester, and it's an ecological reserve. It's a Buddhist reserve. And what they have to do is remove invasive plants. And we have German ivy and English thistle that's overrunning. And actually, we've been working at it for several years now. So some places of it are totally under control. But the thrill of discovering the hidden up indigenous plant, and learning the names of some of these things, it just becomes interesting to them. And sometimes it's really quite a surprise. And I'm sure both Shamu and Naama, when they have people out and engaged, they have similar epiphanies, if you will, that are not always predictable. Okay? Sometimes they'll just come up with observations. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm glad to hear that. I hadn't thought of that one before. But it's good. It's a really good question, and I think it's not that hard to get people interested.
I will add to that. I think there are two things here. One is like, okay. One point is what I also started in my slides with, the question of like, do you force people into this, or are you more inviting people into this? I think that forcing people into environmental action or into environmental leadership is not necessarily a very good idea. And it's always like that. Leaders are few and far between. Not everybody needs to lead this kind of work. So I think that this is okay. And I think that also when you try to force, often you will get forced back. So, and I think sometimes there's, of course, you want to force it on people because you're so convinced, but like, I find that it's not so helpful. And I think that instead, something that is very helpful for me to think, and this is a lot of my work is actually in this realm, is like, how do you build systems that just kind of like divert people towards the directions that you want? So my dissertation is really on integrating environmental education into public schools. But how do you create like environments where people are hearing about it and they're like, it's just part of like the things that are default in their life. You don't have to attract them into it all the time. I think that that's very helpful. It's the same way as like, if you have to all the time explain why you have to brush your teeth, right? That could be very tiring. But if it's like this, just like becoming the default because you're setting a norm and now it's just like no one asks about it anymore. I think that's a more effective maybe way to attract young people into this work with sustainability and ecology. I think the second point is like we have to also think like what does it mean, right, to get people bought into ecology and sustainability? What is this? Is this to get them to compost? Then again, I'm going back to my first point. I think it's better to just kind of like work on getting this to be a city policy or a state policy, and then just part of like, this is just how you do it rather than you choose it. But I think that this is really the big question. What does it mean to bring people into sustainability or ecology? Like people are in ecology. We are in ecology. You don't need to go anywhere. What does it mean to get bought into it? I think many times we want people to get bought into like the kind of ways that we were taught to think about ecology or sustainability. It's not the only way. And I think a lot of the work that is being done in the last years is to say, oh, for years we were just talking about nature as an external thing to us and us needing to work for nature. And now we understand more and more like, no, it's not out there. So I think that we can be careful and a little playful with like the question of like how to get people bought in to ecology and sustainability. Maybe we don't need these big words all the time. My first involvement with environmental education was I was running this initiative in high school. I taught it in Jerusalem, and my friend just sent me photos of we started this. Anyhow, to make a long story short, she just sent me photos from a field trip that they did this week, which is now part of like the default of school, which is about fast fashion. And the kids loved it. Now, they didn't call it sustainability or ecology. Maybe they named it in the end of it. But like, I think that sometimes just like the big words are not getting people bought in and are not also necessarily representing the truth. And that's true also about religiosity. When you're asking how do you get people to buy into Judaism? Some people just by hearing this question, they're like getting an allergy and they're like, just leave me alone. But if you're like, oh wow, I mean, do you want to come for Shabbos meal? Like, do you want to gather? Do you want to? That's something that people can understand. So I think that's a real challenge in our own mind, really. And it's great to think about it again. So thank you for raising this question.
I totally agree with Naama. I don't use the word environment except to say that I avoid using that word environment. And our most common use here at Adamah of the word ecology is what we call ecology the people who cook lunch, who do the work of the home, because that's what oikos means in Greek, is right, the study of the home and taking care of the home systems. I really excited for us to leave the big words behind and gather people around the fire, expose them, give them experiences of awe and connection in nature. Like many colleagues, I think I used to spend more time trying to get people excited about trees and birds and rivers and wild nature. It is so much easier for so many more people to get excited about food. Honestly, food is just a great way. If lots of kids who come on the farm who, if you serve them spinach for dinner in a kitchen, they wouldn't eat it. But will they eat every edible leaf on the farm if they get to pick it themselves? Yes. Yes, they will. It's the experience and the direct connection. And we bring people in, by offering them the things that people want. People want to feel a sense of purpose. They want to feel a sense of belonging. We use song. We use, gathering people in circles. All those tools to bring people in.
Lovely. Ellen was always so adamant that she didn't do environmental thinking, she does ecology. And because she wanted to re-center the vision of the world as God's home, as the home of all of the different circulations of life and vitality that we're very much a part of, and yet also in our work contributing toward, when in the language of certain Jewish mystical traditions would be called creating a dwelling place for the divine within this world, which of course is both an act of construction, but also an act of unveiling, of showing us that the world shimmers with that kind of divine and delight. I'm going to bring this session to a close with a tremendous sense of gratitude to all three of our speakers, our panelists, who have brought their full selves to this experience. I'm going to close with just one or two public service announcements, and then after that, I'm actually going to close with something from Ellen's most recent book, and I think we'll end with her words. So for everyone who'd like to watch the recordings, they are either already available or will be available, all three sessions, in the lobby that was created for this event. Thanks to the IJSS for all their work in making sure that this happens, and this has happened. And please stay tuned. There are going to be many great IJSS events in the next couple of months, and also starting again in the fall. So with that, I think I'm going to turn to Ellen's book, which really explores the themes that we've been talking about today, and also in particular of this panel. Ellen writes, or wrote, "The crisis we find ourselves in is a reflection of our fundamental brokenness. We live in a culture that extols individualism and undervalues interdependence with each other and with the natural world. Our culture asserts that our happiness is a function of more money, more possessions, and higher status, rather than a function of our health, our relationships, our communities, and our sense of purpose, all the things that money can't buy. These beliefs are embedded in our social, political, and educational systems. They are entrenched in a linear economy that takes resources from the earth and gives back contaminants and pollutants. They're so ingrained that we take them for granted. It's not just the whole earth, it's plants and animals, and its systems and processes that suffer from our excesses. We human creatures have become estranged from nearly everything but the things we possess. Learning to love, appreciate, and respect the earth and all its systems and inhabitants is not like learning a scientific theory or a historical fact. Our feelings and our values are not founded in rational thinking. Rather, they come from our direct experience, our intuitions, and the cultures that shape us. They need to be continually nurtured, taught, and lived. Yehi Zichra, Baruch, may her memory be a blessing.